What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to Talk of the Town. This is a podcast where we talk about all things media, creators, business, and more. My name is Tristan. I'm the host of the podcast. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, thank you for tuning in. And if you're returning from previous episodes, thanks so much for stopping by. Today, we've got a really special guest for the podcast. Phil, introduce yourself.
Hey, this is Phil Ranta. I'm an 18-year veteran of the creator economy, former head of gaming at gaming creators at Facebook, former COO over Studio71, first head of network over at Fullscreen. Right now, I am the COO at Fixated, where we're building content and infrastructure around major content creators.
So, Phil, the first question I always ask people outside of your professional career, who are you as a person?
Right now I'm full-time dad as a person. I've got a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. So that every second that I'm not working, for the most part, is that. Try to be a good husband during that time too. But super passionate about pop culture. I think that's really how I got into the whole internet thing. Is I was such an internet nerd. I was on message boards and I was writing blogs, but most of it was about TV and movies and music. I was a film major in college, screenwriting focus. So that was kind of my first love was entertainment. Um, and Midwestern person in Los Angeles, right? Like I've got Midwestern nice but Los Angeles vibe. So, but I'd like to think I'm more beach Los Angeles than like Valley Los Angeles.
Absolutely. I'm on the inverse of that, where I was born in LA and now I'm stuck in Nebraska.
Right,
And so like I remember like a week or two ago, somebody asked me what it's like, and I explained I try bringing a big city mindset to a town that only has like 300,000 people.
right.
So it's like a very drastic difference in terms of things. So obviously you went to the University of Michigan, and as you mentioned, did film. I always ask people, do you think college is still worth it for people who want to get into business or follow like the same career path that you did?
No, probably not. Not in the same way. I mean, for me at my time I went to college, it was kind of cost of doing business. Like most companies said this requires a degree. I think especially in the digital media world, that is less important than having some sort of project or history that shows that you are mature enough to handle a job, right? In fact, I think that 3 of our 6 people in the C-suite at Fixated are not college graduates. They are just killer digital media people, right? Like Luke Bolsch, who is our CCO, he was making $100,000 a month on YouTube when he was 13 years old. To me, that's better than college, right? He just like knows his one lane super, super well. But I think some people need college mostly just to kind of like ramp them into adulthood. I think it's more important for social growth than the education. And if you have a skill, if you want to be a doctor, of course, then yes. But in our world, I think it's so much more important to just like understand content and understand how the money flows. If you do that, nah, you don't need college.
Yeah, like I thought about this even earlier this afternoon because I was talking to somebody who she just graduated college and she's like, I can't really find a place to work at, and so I'm
Mhm.
like telling her like, hey, you should have done internships when you were in college, and like there's other California schools that had significantly more resources than the one she went to. And even now, there's I think like USC has like influencer groups and so many other projects underneath the student associations where it's just like it's crazy to see how educators realize content is actually king these days.
Yeah, shout out to Reach, which is the USC one that's now, God, they're on dozens of campuses. I'm on their
Yeah.
executive advisory board, and I have met some of the smartest, most passionate college students through Reach, just 20-year-olds who are just killing it and going to college. So
Yeah.
it's just an incredible organization and something I really wish existed when I was in college, except for there was no social media when I was in college outside of AOL, Friendster, I think. Facebook launched when I was a senior. So
Was MySpace around at
yeah, well, yeah, MySpace was
that time? Okay.
around, but I mean, on my college campus, MySpace was kind of popular, but when Facebook launched in 2005 on University of Michigan's campus, that's when
Yeah.
social media, because everyone used it as a dating site. At that time, you could still put in your class schedule and then see all the girls or guys
Yeah.
in those classes and flirt for like it was Tinder before Tinder, and it was very, very exciting for us in college.
Yeah. So, what was your first job out of college?
My first job out of college, speaking of internship, it was a place that I interned that brought me in. It was a reality TV company. I was brought in as a development assistant, which essentially meant I had to like write show bibles and do dirty work at that time, copy tapes and go on runs. And um, I was in Los Angeles at that time. I came out for it. It was $400 a week that I was being paid. So had to share a bedroom. Very, very scrappy, right? Like not making quite enough to live in Los Angeles, but doing it for the love. Uh, and while I was there, I shot a TV show when I was in college, and I was trying my best to like shop it around, whatever that meant. And then when that show sold to superdeluxe.com, that's when I took my first digital job. So I was not in the TV industry for very long.
Absolutely. You then went on to Viral Vision, which it makes me feel old because I remember when Viral Vision started.
Mhm.
And so like what was it like working there like the early like beginnings of really the creator space?
Yeah, I mean, at that time, nobody, I mean, they say nobody knows anything. It's the Wild West now. Back in 2006, nobody knew anything, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
at that point, we were doing a lot of like mobile phone deals where it was content for like the cable on your phone pitch. The V3 Razor was the most popular handset. It was pre-smartphone revolution. So we were doing like picture slideshows and wallpapers and
Yeah.
the videos we were shooting, we had almost zero budget for. Like we were running an extreme sports network for Verizon called Activate with an eight, and we would just take our cameras, our mini DV cameras, go down to the Encinitas skate park, try to find really interesting skaters, interview them, say, "Hey, will you do some tricks for the camera?" Like that was our content. We shot it for the cost of our camera time and our on camera host, right? So it was like, it was insanely scrappy, but at that time we were kind of learning the BuzzFeed model before we knew that was a model, which is like you have 20 characters of text on a phone to get people to click. How do you get them to click, right? And we got
Yeah.
very good at that. So that was really the learning from that is like, how can you be scrappy and get views and make money when the budgets are almost non existent?
And it's funny because it feels like it's been almost 20 years since 2006. It feels like Hollywood and entertainment is kind of going in that same direction now where budgets are like so much more constrained than they used to be
Mm-hmm.
for like 99% of projects out there. Um,
Right.
Whether or not that's because like most Hollywood projects are kind of like shooting themselves in the foot or it's
Mm-hmm.
just the entertainment industry always changing, I think is fascinating. But I remember the mid 2000s because I had discovered YouTube as a kid because I grew up with no adult supervision in a military family.
Mm-hmm.
And I still remember Lonely Girl 15, Fred, Annoying Orange. I think Smosh had just started around maybe 2008, 2009, maybe earlier. Um, all to say, I basically have had a traumatic childhood.
Well, you know,
Like
if you have friends like Fred and Smosh to lean on, it's not. Not so bad. I mean, the early days of the internet, so much of it was just references to
Y-
mainstream pop culture, right?
Yeah, it was
So,
mostly like YouTube back in its infancy was like cat videos and then people
mhm,
taking clips from like SNL and like regular broadcasts. Um and I still have to give credit to the guys who did Lonely Girl like, "Hey, let's make a Blair
mhm.
Witch styled show on YouTube."
Yeah.
Uh
I
and it
remember when that was explosively big. We were working in internet content, so naturally, like everybody back then, we did a parody for Verizon called Awesome Dude 30,
yeah.
which was kind of the same concept, but like a 30-year-old vlogging, which at that time was a hilarious concept that a non-kid would vlog. Um, but Lonely Girl, we got in really close with that team and with Miles and the guys that ran it,
Yeah.
and they were doing kind of the same. There was zero, like practically zero budget, grabbing cameras and running around with kids and simple scripts, and
Yeah,
they did a
like
brilliant job. Yeah.
yeah, like I remember somebody cuz somebody once filled me in and they're like the whole thing was started because of a Craigslist ad
Hmm.
between Miles, Greg, and this
Hmm.
one. I'm blanking on the third guy's name. Mesh. That's it. And I just always thought it was funny of like, okay, a doctor, screenwriter, and a lawyer are at a bar, and you come up with the first
Right.
ever web show on the internet.
Right.
And even then, it was like the first channel to get into YouTube's partner network at the time.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think it's cool to also see like even just a few years ago there were some offshoot like ARGs happening in the creator space, and I always thought like, you know what, it's nice to see that that trend is still somewhat around or pops out every once in a while from the groundhog hole.
Oh
um
yeah. Well, it was tentpole viewing. That I think
yeah,
that people who didn't live through Lonely Girl don't realize what Lonely Girl was at that time for
yeah,
internet nerds, right? It was like it was appointment viewing. Like when a new
yeah,
episode dropped, everyone was talking about it on the entire internet, and everyone
yeah.
piled in. It's
And
like
I mean they had
Mr.
the
Beast may have more views, but not the cachet. You know.
yeah, and I mean like they had the blog, they had forums, they had the
Hmm.
in real life stuff that they did. um So I think it's always just fun to look back at stuff like that and be like, "Geez, that was 18 years ago."
Yeah. And I don't think anybody's doing. I mean, like Bernie Sue has done stuff that's as
Yeah,
cool as that. Naturally, it's he wasn't the first, so it wasn't as
yeah,
impactful. But very few people are giving that much dedication and care to narrative storytelling online. I would love to
yeah.
see that change. Yeah.
I I've pondered and I've talked to some of the people who were behind the revival project of it a
Mhm.
few years ago, and really like it's a tough thing to do because celebrity culture I think invaded YouTube and like creator culture to where
Mhm.
something like that can't really ever be done again unless it was like a major like studio backing or an endeavor. And I think that the only time they were considering doing it was cuz like YouTube was still doing originals at the time.
Mhm.
Um, so but I think it's nice to know that like luckily all the content is still there for people to watch.
Mhm.
I still see people who go and comment on the videos all the time who are just so confused and I'm like, "Oh man, only if you knew."
Right. Yeah, I wish I could watch it for the first time because, like, when the first episodes dropped, they were a phenomenon, and
Yeah.
I remember watching and not knowing if it's real and being like,
Yeah.
this is crazy, right?"
Yeah.
So yeah, wild when they finally revealed that it was scripted, like internet blew up again, right?
Yeah.
Because
And
like there was a popular vlog where someone was talking about how she thinks her family's in a cult, and you're like, what am I watching? This is crazy.
well the and before we move on, like the two dead giveaways, and I talked to somebody about this who used to work at YouTube at the time, was
Hmm.
one, they were using copyrighted music, which like nobody was
Right,
doing. And
right,
then the second was the like she had a photo or something of like Aleister Crowley on like a bed frame or something, or like a and it was just like, all right, cool. I'm like planting the seeds plus like breaking the fourth wall at the same time.
right, right.
So From there, you went on to full screen, and we're basically, correct me if I'm wrong, but number 9 or number 10 at the company.
Yeah, I was the first head of network, still very early days there. It was, when I went in for my interview, there was like a few dudes sitting around picnic tables and an office dog running around, and I'm like, what am I doing here? Because that was not that long after the 2008 crash, where like the whole digital industry went away for a few years. It was like really tough time for people like me.
Yeah,
So coming back at it, I was like, I was pretty hungry. I needed a job, right? So took it before I really knew what a network was, before they even knew what a network was, and they essentially had an intern show me what a CMS was and said, can you get people to join this and give them value? And I was like, let's see. 7 months later, we were the number one network in the world by ComScore. So I went from zero knowledge of it to largest network in the world in 7 months, and it was all just spreadsheets and grit.
yeah. I mean, I remember when because I started making content in March of 2012,
Hmm.
and I I was very fortunate where for I think I was, well, fortunately and unfortunately, I learned MCNs were both a good and a bad thing for the creator space.
Hmm.
Um, Mostly because I got wrapped in machinima for a
Oh
very
yeah, that
small
one.
period of time. um, but also I think it was an accomplishment at the same time. Like I had a channel that literally had like almost nothing, and like it was like cool. I'm on the same thing as like Optic and like PewDiePie and a ton of other people at the time who were great. Um, but obviously you got to work with people like Shane Dawson, the Fine Bros, brands like Google and Coca Cola. What was that experience like? Because I think it's so crazy to look back at like those people in their like very early careers and like where they are now and see like how that has shaped the internet.
Yeah, I mean it was a wild office. Think about it this way: like the CEO of Fullscreen was in his early 30s and a first-time CEO, essentially from middle manager at Google to first-time CEO. The COO was in his early 30s, um, had some experience out in the market, but like still pretty young and had not run large companies before. Almost everybody on my team was in their early 20s, right? The whole network team and the management team. So going to them and saying like, "Hey, this is the ways you make this creator's career better," and they come back to you and they're like, "Look, I'm going on dates and I'm getting drunk all weekend. Like, what do you want from me?" They were not rise and grind people necessarily. I mean, it was kind of a frat house. Our happy hours were insane because it was very young and a lot of people that didn't know how to manage people. I would put myself in that bucket. Like I had been managing teams before, but nothing of that scale. The team I managed previously was like 8 people, and then suddenly I found 30 24-year-olds under me, and I was like, oh my god, they were dating each other and breaking up and getting mad, and it was a lot to handle.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the reason why I think that we were so successful is because, first of all, we had a culture within the talent team of, yes, this network is unsustainably large. That was the decision the company made, was to make it unsustainably large, but we had to be the front face of that. And it was just like add value in any way you can. So we worked really hard on the tech product. I was saying to everybody, like, check in with your people, focus, like, grind, 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 grind. And I feel like a lot of people really embodied that. And then also we were the people that wanted to figure it out, right? Like we knew that the creator economy was a thing. So we would go in and passionately pitch to brands why this isn't just sneezing pandas. And so we were able to get a lot of stuff across the line before influencer marketing had really taken hold anywhere.
Yeah, and it's crazy looking at it too because like even when full screen started, Ezra, who was the CEO or COO, like he now runs part of Night, which is just even more crazier to think about. You guys had Rooster Teeth and Screw Attack, which was still insane even to think about at that time. Um, I guess what were some of the challenges like being, a media network and
Mhm.
sometimes a pretty volatile space because obviously MCNs sort of became like a dime a dozen and then they all rapidly just fell like dominoes. Hey everyone, before we go any further, I want to talk about a particular sponsor for this episode, that being Beehive. Beehive is the all in one newsletter platform for those that want to build, publish, grow, and monetize their platform. If you're someone who has an audience and doesn't have a newsletter, you're missing out in 2024 because it's one of the best ways to build a media brand. And the people at Beehive know this because the original team at Beehive also worked at Morning Brew and went on to create Beehive based off of what they learned at the company. When it comes to Beehive, there's so many amazing things. You have a all-in-one platform for building a newsletter, both in a web format and as a mobile app. You're able to grow your own newsletter through Boost to build your list and gain new subscribers, a referral program, and at the same time, when you're looking at monetizing, there's so many ways that you can monetize from subscriptions to ad networks, and on top of that, it's an easy to use platform. And if you really want to check out what Beehive is doing, there will be a 30-day free trial as well as 20% off for 3 months that you guys can use in the link down below. But with that being said, let's get on with the episode.
Yeah, I mean, it was not an easy job. We were putting in a lot of hours, and a lot of it was C-level executives pounding their chests and saying, "I'm going to make you a millionaire," which none of us were made into millionaires, but that was kind of what kept us really driven. I mean,
Yeah,
all of us love the space. We wouldn't have taken that job for lower pay and everything in those early days if it wasn't for us really loving internet content. But um, I'd say that the biggest challenge was it was the blind leading the blind, right? I at that point had been a creator. I knew internet content really well. I didn't know how to manage talent. I'd never worked at CAA or UTA. I knew the creator journey because I was on the creator journey at times in my career. But like I was selling cell phone content before that. I wasn't like a core YouTuber, right? And a lot of the team wasn't either. They were just people who were young and passionate and wanted to figure it out. So we learned about product build really quickly because the first thing that I really pushed on was okay, this network's already getting too big. We don't know how to manage everybody. We need to build out a creator dashboard, which we were the first MCN to build out a creator dashboard that then kind of everybody used ours as a template to build theirs. Um, and we started building really interesting technology like Channelizer, where it was able to give optimization advice at scale, which now I look at Spotter Studio and there's kind of echoes of Channelizer. And we were the first ones to build a marketplace where brands could connect to creators at scale, which is kind of like a precursor to FameBit, which sold to Google. And there's still a lot of like platforms doing now, like Grin. And so we were building a ton of really interesting stuff. Um, Ultimately, I think that the learning was you can't just keep signing and taking AdSense from people and not expect them to just like eventually be like, hey, what the hell? I'm not getting my value out of this.
yeah,
And they were very much right. I like very much so. We were trying our best with our team that we had to try to add as much value as we could, but eventually there's a breaking point. We just don't have enough warm bodies to provide that value. And I think that ultimately that's why it all felt like dominoes was it was Silicon Valley scale thinking saying grow, 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 grow. And then the reality of human beings who could only do so much for so many creators. And when those two things clashed, it was game over for the MCNs.
yeah. I mean, I made a post about this earlier this year when Rooster Teeth fell because really like Rooster Teeth, Machinima, Full Screen, Group Nine, tons of other like YouTube MCNs and media networks for creators have all quietly gone away within the last like 5 or 6 years. With Full Screen merged into Machinima, which might have been owned by Warner at the time. What do you think really led to the death of a lot of these networks?
I think that they were acquired by larger media companies who didn't know what to do with creators necessarily, right? Like when Disney bought Maker
Yeah,
for, for what, $1 billion on paper, even though after the earnout there was not even close to $1 billion, but still it was a
yeah,
great headline.
yeah,
Um, I remember the big controversy is Disney actually then looked at PewDiePie, which was their biggest talent, and went, "Whoa, he has like an N-word scandal, and he's got like an anti-Semitism scandal, and like we
yeah,
just bought this for $1 billion." But I feel like people just didn't understand what they were actually buying,
yeah,
and they were buying temporary contracts with creators that had to be renegotiated, and a bunch of digital experts. So originally,
yeah,
eventually, they just went, "All right, well, these other things are kind of useless because these contracts end. So there's only so much we can do with this. Let's just keep the digital experts and roll them into larger company and get rid of all the stuff that is scary and not brand safe and hard to control." So when you get acquired by a larger company, it's a different thing, right? Because large
yeah,
companies, if it doesn't up into the right by 50% every single year, then they consider you a failure and you go away. They're like placing bets. So everybody I mean, if you think about the networks that persist, Collab is still around. They were
yeah.
around in those days. They're still around, right? Broadband
Broadband TV
TV is
is
still
still
around.
around in some capacity.
Yeah.
Um,
I still
and
sit on the board of Elfon in the Middle East. They're still around, and they're one of the
yeah,
biggest MCNs in the Middle East. So there are people who were able to add enough value and keep it controlled enough to do well. Unfortunately, those were not the ones that exited to major media companies that just wanted to clock those billions of monthly views.
yeah, and it's funny because it's funny you bring up Maker. A few years ago, I was doing a presentation for a startup week here in Lincoln during the pandemic, so it was virtual. And lo and behold, one of the guys who was in the audience, and I didn't know it at the time, was actually the head of the influencer network for Maker.
Oh
So
wow.
I always joke that like it was great to get to like meet him from that, and at the same time I also realized afterwards like I should not have been the one presenting about digital entertainment from a creator standpoint when you've got the guy who was working at Maker for years and years on end. Um, but I think it's always fun looking at like what happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so from there you went on to be the COO of Studio 71, which is still killing it. You know, it's
Yeah.
crazy to see like how entrenched in both digital entertainment, traditional entertainment Studio 71 is. So,
hmm
what was it like going into that environment, working with the talent network and the tech side of things?
Yeah. I mean, they already had a really strong company by the time I came in, which is rare for me. I was a 0 to 1 guy my entire career, and now all of a sudden I found myself being like the coming in at a later stage and seeing if I can add value. The challenge they were having and the reason they brought me in is every other MCN was exiting for these big dollar amounts, and they were around just as long, and they just weren't at the same scale as like a full screen or a Maker or a Machinima. So they said, "Hey, can you help us figure that side out?" They were kind of stuck at 1 billion monthly views, and at this time, like Machinima Maker, we were like 8 billion monthly views, and Broadband TV was at 10 billion monthly views. So they were way behind. So yeah, I came in, I kind of restructured the incentive structures and how people managed and put real budgeting in place. And I already had access to their larger creator set, which was really exciting because it was very mid tier for a lot of full screen. We had some big people, but it was mostly mid tier. Here it was like all killer, no filler, like just huge, huge talent. And I was exposed to people who used to work at the major talent agencies, Resident Dan and all of that. So I got a little bit of that culture for better or for worse. I was used to the little bit more the hippy dippy Silicon Valley culture. I went into like not that they were those kind of guys, but the kind of guys that came up in the industry getting coffee thrown at their heads and like dealing with multi-million-dollar deals. Like it was
Yeah,
just culturally very different. It was very butts and seats. And I had to kind of manage the team and keep them motivated with kind of like digital workloads plus Hollywood mentality.
Yeah.
It was extremely challenging. And but it was another learning experience, my first C-suite experience. So I got to see a lot of things that then kind of developed the rest of my career after that.
Now, you mentioned blending, sort of a startup mentality with the Hollywood mindset. How challenging is that actually? Because I think most people who don't work in the industry see the entertainment industry like sort of. I think I've always equated it to, if you remember this like infamous clip from SpongeBob where there's like 20 SpongeBob's running around and all the file cabinets are on fire and like everything's just seeming like hell. It feels almost
Mhm.
like that at times.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is the thing that Hollywood and digital still battle with is where Hollywood is getting it wrong is they think all digital content is garbage. Still, right? I still get a lot of people who are like, "Ooh, check out what this channel is doing, getting millions of monthly views. Imagine what they would do if we had like professional cameras there." And my answer is always, "Great, it would be worse." Right? Like part of the joy of digital is that it feels DIY and that dirty word authenticity, right?
Yeah,
That's what makes it work. It's kind of like going to an improv comedy show and being like, "Ooh, imagine if they have scripts." And it's like that's not the point. The point of improv is improv, right?
yeah,
Um, but also, then on the digital side, where I'll slam them a little bit, is like digital people think that they can go in and help creators, and that creators need a bunch of middlemen and executors, and a lot of them just simply don't. It's
yeah.
like creator to audience, and yeah, they need thin layers of help, but they certainly, for the most part, don't need
A
that kind of
10-person team
traditional
like
Hollywood.
helping them on like
Right.
everything. There's only a certain amount of people who are like, yeah, I need 5 people to help me with audience development and market research and content strategy. And like I was very fortunate where um towards the end of my time in the YouTube partner network, I was lucky to end at Scale Lab.
Hmm.
And even as someone who like had low four figures for a subscriber count, they were like, "Yeah, we'll have like someone from our audience team come like sit down with you on Google Meet and talk and like
That's
help
great.
you out," which was for me. I was like, "That's crazy." And even then, I had a guy who was like indirectly a like manager contact as well, which was super nice. I blame Logan Paul for why that ended,
Of
for
course.
obvious
Yeah.
reasons.
And you know what's funny is I was at Studio 71 and we had Logan Paul in our network when all of that went down. So,
Oh my,
uh, yeah, so we got some of the brunt of that, and there was a lot of people who were tagging me and tagging Studio 71 in their tweets saying, "Are you going to boot him out of your network?" And we had to have emergency meetings, and that was a tough
yeah.
time.
I remember waking up to that, and like I lived in Japan for a few years as a kid,
Hmm.
and my immediate reaction was just like, "Oh no, what have you done?"
Right.
like,
Yeah,
um,
representing the worst stereotypes of America, right?
well, yeah, because it wasn't just the forest; it was going into culturally respected places in Japanese culture and being a nuisance and doing all sorts
Yeah.
of
He
other.
was throwing Pokeballs at
Yeah,
Japanese people. I'm like, do you know how offensive? Like, dude,
yeah,
he was old enough at that time to know better, but the
yeah.
industry moved on, which is wild. Like everybody who talks about cancel culture, I'm like, who? Everybody who's been canceled is back, right? Like,
Yeah, and it's just crazy to again to look at these kinds of things where, and I think it still happens all the time where bigger creators do something, the smaller creators suffer. Like we're
mhm.
seeing that right now
Yes.
with Twitch, even where people are saying like they're going through a little bit of a, like adpocalypse for the first time, and I'm
Hmm.
not surprised. Like even somebody asked me this morning about it. Um, and I said, I can't really be surprised because I've been waiting for the shoe to drop.
Yeah.
Because it's like people get banned on Twitch for like a weekend, come back, get banned maybe like for a year or whatever, but you really don't have like this sort of like streamer advertising revolt like we do now, where brands are just
Yeah,
like, I don't even want to, it's not even just an individual creator thing now. It's like this is a platform issue.
right. And it's wild because I mean, even Elon Musk does not understand the branded economy, right? Because he
Yeah.
was like, brands were literally leaving Twitter and he was saying, "You are hampering my free speech." And we're
Well,
like,
yeah.
oh boy,
Well,
you
not
do
only
not
that,
like,
you know, I I was both like, um, I think it was both like horrified and also at the same time kind of um encouraged by the fact that Elon literally went on to like a summit and
Mhm.
literally in a room full of executives and advertisers, and even I think Bob Iger himself was just like telling advertisers, go yourselves.
Right.
And I'm like, nobody else can do that besides
Right,
him.
because everybody else has to care about whether or not the platform succeeds, right?
Yeah,
The misunderstanding is like brands have so many options of where to market.
yeah,
Like the only ones that would be really devastating for most brands is losing Meta and losing YouTube. And that's
yeah,
because their ad product is so optimized that like
yeah,
a dollar spent there is better than a dollar spent almost anywhere else. But
yeah,
like Twitter has always been an afterthought 'cause their ad product sucked. So, like,
yeah,
dude, you have people leaving your platform, then there's one way to make it defensible where they'll turn the other cheek no matter what is said on the platform. And that's by making their ROI better, right? But he doesn't understand that.
Do you think Blue Sky could do advertising well if they were to implement it?
I think anyone can do advertising well. And during my time working at Facebook, not to cut ahead, but I got really
Yeah,
immersed in the Facebook ad product. And I was always a content guy. So I would like,
yeah,
the ad team would go do the ad stuff and who cares. But once I got in there, I was like, oh, they built it out like thinking about like opening an iPhone for the first time and how you set that up, that elegant. But they did it for ads. It's
yeah,
not jargony, it's not hard. Like even when you go and try to set up a YouTube ad, it's still a little bit too like you have to be an advertiser to understand what the hell they're talking about. Not
yeah.
Facebook. You can hit
No,
boost
like
and say
even with
boost against people who own
Instagram,
cats, you know?
yeah,
Yeah.
like even with Instagram, I remember I did like a $5 test one day just because I was
Hmm.
bored with it. Maybe more than that. I don't remember. And I remember within like a week, one singular post had like 600 likes,
Hmm.
and like it was even more like broadly targeted. But even then, like it was so clean where it's like you could just say, these are the people I want to target. This is the age. These are the cities. This is the preferences of people. Like whether it's TV shows or comics or films or whatever. And then it's just like, all right, done, cool. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, from there you went on to Mob Crush,
Hmm.
again running and managing their creator network. Uh, what was it like being going from like a traditional entertainment creator kind of thing to more of a gaming focus side?
Yeah, I mean, I've been a gamer my whole life, right? Like, I come from the generation where I was what 5 or 6 when the NES came out, right? So like I have always loved video games, and I was so burnt out on the MCM thing after 8 years of it that I just wanted to land somewhere where I can learn different parts of my skill. And Mob Crush at that time, the CEO was Mike Wan, who was the CRO over at Full Screen. So him and I remained good friends. And he's like, "Look, my problem is that I don't know how to activate creators on this really cool software that allows you to stream on multiple platforms and stream directly from your mobile phone." So I was like, cool, I want to come in and take a crack at it. And we developed some great technology there. Like, we were one of the first ones to do a mobile first multi platform IRL streamer. We launched it at VidCon and we had like the Try Guys using it in our suite. It was huge. ultimately it was going back to very early stage startup kind of stuff, and it was hard. It was a grind, but ultimately after I left, they sold to Super League Gaming. So
Before we go any further with this episode, I want to talk about a sponsor of the podcast, that being Public.com. Public.com is an investing platform that allows everyone to invest in stocks, ETFs, cryptos, bonds, treasury bills, and alternative assets like fine arts and collectibles all in one place. Public also is really known for social investing, which means that you can see what other investors on the app are investing in and also see their gains, their losses, and also see discussions that other users are having with each other all in one particular social feed. As someone who's been using public.com for multiple years and became a community ambassador, I can tell you that there is no other platform like them out there. They are better than Robinhood, Fidelity, and tons of other brokerages out there because it just sets them so different from the rest. Make sure to go check out them in the show notes down below as well. Make sure to see all their disclosures at public.com/disclosures. And with that being said, let's get to the episode.
we we definitely grew up from there. I learned a lot about product building, and ultimately, I learned that I love early stage startups, and I think that was my aha moment from Mob Crush.
Yeah, like getting into an experience in like already established place. I feel like a lot of times if you're not like someone who worked their way up, um, it feels maybe like you get dragged a bit. And then if you're someone who's
Yeah.
just coming in the midlife or the third quarter of a business, it feels sometimes like, hey, I'm just here to clean things up, make it efficient,
Mhm.
and then like leave it in capable hands, hopefully.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of my realizations at Studio 71. To be brutally honest with you and with myself, I think that they needed me for a year, and then I kind of hung out for 2 more years, right? I was working really hard during that time. I was doing my best, but what they really needed was somebody to come in and restructure how the company operated. And I did that in year one. And then year two and year three, I was like, refining value prop, and I was like doing a lot of HR with the team and stuff like that. And I was like, I kind of have done the bulk. It was the kind of place where it was a little hard to get new initiatives across the line, and
Yeah.
so why did they really need me after that year one? Whereas when you're in a early stage startup mode, it's like everybody needs you deeply for everything you do, and I think I just operate better in that capacity.
Yeah. I think there's always something nice about inserting yourself into a firestorm of sorts where,
Hmm.
hey, everything is burning every single day and it's all just like, hey, how can we like put this together, you know? Ooh. From there you went to Facebook, became the head of gaming creators for North America. Remind me, was that before or after Mixer got acquired by Facebook?
That was before. Yeah,
Okay.
that was so Mixer got acquired. I was working that deal a little bit while I was there, but it was right after I left that Mixer got acquired. Well, acquired is a weird word. It was a partnership by which Mixer
Yeah.
would have a soft landing and then be able to move their creators easily over to Facebook.
Yeah, because it was like we don't want to kill Mixer, but at the same time, we don't want to tell everybody like, "Hey, go back to Twitch."
Right.
Um, but you guys had some pretty notable deals. This guy's toast, Ronda Rousey. I feel like there were also just a ton of other creators who I knew personally who I just remember one day were like, "Hey, I'm moving over to Facebook," and I thought
Hmm.
like, okay, that's wild that Facebook is getting into the streaming game. But you guys did it so perfectly well for quite some time, um, that I feel like it could have created a real competitor to Twitch.
I agree. But I realized when I went over there that I'm not a big tech guy, right? For all the move fast and break stuff kind of platitudes that Facebook talks about, it was like it's incredibly hard to move fast in big tech in the way that somebody who's early stage startup is going,
Yeah,
like, to the point where I'm used to getting a great deal with a talent put in front of me and being able to say, yep, let's get it done, and then run to my CEO and go, I need $1 million. I can get this thing done. And I swear I'll make $5 million. They're like, all right, Phil, you haven't let me down the path. You
Yeah,
cannot do that at a place like Facebook because there's
yeah,
like politics and guardrails, and so like I had a very narrow lane there. And I think I did well within my narrow lane, right? Like being able to get like signs like Ronda Rousey. Yes, I had to do a lot of like maneuvering and politicking in order to do something like that, but got it done. It just like it took 20 times longer than it should have. And when I would say, hey, this is crazy, people would be like, keep your mouth shut. If you just grind out for another 3 years, you can become a VP. And I'm like, oh, this is awful. So
yeah.
wasn't
It's
for me.
like I've always had that problem myself where I'm sort of always fortunate because I've always been on the founder side of things or like
Hmm.
being part of something very early on and just I've always especially online, I've always had this mindset to people where I'm like I'm not afraid to say whatever I want to about particular industries because what are you going to do? Fire me from my own company?
Right.
Like,
Totally.
that's a luxury that some people have, and I wield it with great responsibility.
Hmm.
But like, I agree. Like being in a tech environment, it's really rough from that perspective. Even a few weeks ago, I was talking to somebody who used to work at Warner, and their biggest advice that they gave to me was like, if you're in a meeting, like sit on your hands, shut your mouth, just observe. And I'm like, oh, that's a challenge for a kid with severe ADHD, but okay. Like
Well,
you're
also it's like what I get that a lot too, and then I'm like, well, then why am I here, right?
yeah, it's
Like
like you
if
hired me to create things and to produce results, and if I can't create this, I can't produce this.
right, or if like you're gonna have people whose entire job is to say no to everything, like what I come from the school of improv where it's like, yes, let's explore, let's figure it out. And when you get into a group where it's like, oh, that person is always going to say no to you for everything because he doesn't like your department, he wants your whole budget to be cut. Which once you get into big tech, that happens all the time. And then I'm like, well, what? So why am I here? Oh, he doesn't want you to be here. Oh, well, so what? I just am not able to get anything done. Oh no, you just have to go like buy him a dinner and ask for a big favor. And I'm like, what the hell world are we in? Aren't we all rowing in one direction to try to find success? And of course, like
Yeah,
now that I've been away from Facebook for a while, the people that was making it hardest for us to actually move forward from our jobs are the ones that are still there and are getting promoted year over
yeah,
year over year. And I'm like, well, that's the problem with big tech is if
yeah.
it's not about good work, it's about good politicking, you know?
I think that's a lot of what the startup world is like. I mean, I see so many founders that I've talked to and really screw themselves over by being in this grow, grow, grow scale mentality. And I think that was a
Mhm.
lot of what the gaming and the esports space was like. And when venture capital came in as well. And then everyone realized eventually, like, oh, wait, what have we done? Um,
Right.
because, back in 2016, nobody was profitable in esports.
Hmm.
8 years later, you still have the same thing where, like, everyone, like, I even remember I think it was a week or two ago, a marketing professor I know asked me like, "What's the craziest business story of a failure that you can give me that would be relevant?" And I sent him FaZe Clan because it was like nobody in the right mind would ever IPO a gaming company that literally was unprofitable to begin with.
Yeah.
So
It's what's wild about that too is my one of my partners in this company was the CEO at Face Clan,
yeah,
Zach Katz, who's now the CEO of Fixated at that time. And I think that everybody, I mean, I can't speak for his behalf, but I think that everyone kind of knew that to be true. But
yeah,
this was also the meme stock revolution. And like,
yeah,
look at Tesla's actual earnings as opposed to Toyota, and then look at the stock price, right? We
yeah,
live in a world of meme stocks. So it's
yeah.
like, so I think that they were thinking they could ride that, but eventually kind of business dynamics come back and bite you.
Well, I think it's also that. if I remember, like before they even IPO'd, banks had been saying, "Oh, FaZe is probably the only like profitable esports organization out there." And then when we were like, "Excuse me, sir, no, you're not."
Right.
Like
Yeah. It's a wonderful
uh,
thing to say. It's just reality comes and bites you, you know?
yeah. So and I mean, FaZe is doing interesting things now with Game Squared and
Hmm.
splitting between FaZe and FaZe Media. I wonder how long that's going to go for. But also at the same time, I remember when that acquisition happened where I immediately kind of said to myself, okay, you didn't like corporate people, and now you're making a deal with corporate people.
Yep.
So, so it's just kind of like, what gives here?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's very easy to Monday morning quarterback for this, but I agree with
Yeah,
you that I think that, like, they didn't understand their own superpowers. Their own superpowers were like cool factor and like being top of mind for aspiring gamers, and like they had influencers in a way other esports orgs didn't have influencers, and like they had so much going for them, but what that laddered up to was not what they were pushing for, right? Like they
yeah,
could have built a very strong business of um, kind of like Gary Vaynerchuk has done
yeah,
with like VaynerMedia, right? Where it's like they could have owned gaming culture marketing. They could have had esports schools for young kids that want to come up through that and do like School of Rock, but an after school program. I'm just wild pitching now, but like
yeah. I mean,
that was the
it's
lane they could
it's
have
not a
won,
wild
you
pitch.
know?
I know like Cloud9 and TSM did that, and I know
Hmm.
Fnatic has done it. Like Fnatic has
Yeah,
an entire college program that they do in the UK.
right.
So
And that's smart, right? Because
yeah,
you're tapping into interesting budgets with a willing fan base, and that ain't the investor class. Like that's
yeah,
investor class wants to see real dollars coming in, you know?
yeah. So this is the point in time with the podcast where I like to throw a little bit of a curveball
Okay.
and let you become the host, bring up topics or questions that you want my thoughts on. So Phil, the floor is yours.
Oh my gosh, that is a curveball. But there's one that I'm like totally nerded out about right now, which is um, how AI is going to affect the creator economy. You know what? I'm going to let it sit there. How is AI going to affect the creator economy? I'm not going to try to guide you in one way or another.
I'm still diametrically opposed to AI in the creator space. And I think it's mostly just again because I am from LA and I know what happened last year with the double strikes and how important that was to have AI protections, and at the same time like you can't deny that there are good things about AI where it's helping people do business things better or manage things better. Um so I wonder to that extent how things will go, but I try for me at least, I try to stay as far away from AI as I can. Um
Mhm.
my thing is I always say if it's something that impacts the job of somebody else out there from having a career, I don't want
Mhm.
to touch it. Um
Sure.
or have a podcast editing with like short form clips, which is like all the rave right now.
Mhm.
That is something to me where I'm like, okay, that's fine because like most people that do that stuff are freelance people.
Right.
But if we're talking, AI taking out like entire departments or upending entire businesses, I try to stay away from that as much as possible and just have that human element to things.
That's fair. Now, bearing that in mind, not to dwell on this point too long,
Sure,
there's kind of like AI, let's say idealists and then AI realists in the creator economy.
sure.
The idealists are like, this is going to make workflows so much better that a young creator can come in and make, like they always talk about the three-person Marvel movie, right? I could
Yeah,
be 13 years old and I can make a Marvel movie because of it. And then who I would consider to be the AI realists, the ones that are like, corporate interests are going to come in and create a glut of bad content, bury out all the voices, because once you can make 100,000 videos in a day that's optimized to an algorithm, then it's going to ruin all social media. Do you believe that one or the other is going to come true, or do you believe it's somewhere in the middle?
I think somewhere in the middle. Like, and let's be fair. Even myself, like I joked about this when ChatGPT came out. I told a friend of mine while we were watching Netflix, it's like, hey, this is finally the time where if somebody watches a television show and goes, man, I could write something so much better than this episode. Now
Yeah,
you have the resources to do it.
totally.
But like, I think at the same time, there is a real threat to AI where,
Hmm.
again, like, you look at, like, I'll give a really good example. When Marvel did the intro for Secret Invasion,
Oh yeah,
the fact that it was all AI generated because Marvel was in this, and I don't blame, I blame them to an extent, but I also understand they dug their own bed
right.
because they were also being blacklisted by a lot of the VFX community over other things.
Sure.
So I still look at that and I go like, that was a terrible decision.
Hmm.
Um, both from a quality and from a standpoint of like, hey, we care about creativity and filmmaking, and like that's the whole
But
spirit of
people are still
Marvel.
making that decision, right? Like
Yeah,
Coca-Cola is now getting backlash from their AI generated holiday commercial.
yeah.
So, do people see this as like yeah, you're going to get negative feedback, but also it's just kind of how it's done. Kids are home. Sorry.
I think some people will rationalize it in a corporate environment as it's just the cost of doing business. Like even what Jaguar did yesterday, where they came out with this whole marketing campaign, but it's like, hey, where's the car?
Right. Totally.
um, so again, I think when it comes to AI, it's right now we're somewhere between the middle of like, hey, it's be really cool to do this kind of things, and then there's the people who are realists and like setting up like the framework of like, hey, you can't put an AI generated book onto Amazon. Or like I was even telling somebody about this yesterday where there's a story about a dude who realized he could create AI generated music, put that on
Hmm.
Spotify and use that same AI to just only play that music and then
Yeah.
create royalties off of that, and was
Hmm.
making like hundreds of thousands of dollars for like years. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a pretty bad thing.
Right.
um, you
Yeah.
know,
Robot content being consumed by robots for advertisements that are made by robots, right? Like, that's the
but at the same
dystopian
time,
future.
when you do that, it affects the independent artist or the people out there who are just trying to get on a a featured playlist maybe. Um,
Yeah.
so that's where I stand with AI.
Well, I'm curious too. I mean, not to keep diving into AI forever.
Sure.
The 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 whole point of AI is take in other content that has existed,
Yeah.
use that to train a robot, and then have the robot go out and spit out something that's kind of like a simulacrum of what they saw before, right?
Yeah.
All of these models, all of them have trained on data that they did not own. YouTube, everything else.
Yeah.
Should these models be regulated into non-existence right now, and the only way people should be able to build LLMs is to have fully licensed everything? Or is this just like, sorry dude, the genie's out of the bottle now, there's no going back, you can't shut down chat GPT?
So I don't think you should shut down Chat GPT, but the 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 thing that I always wonder is, and I always, I even talked about this privately with somebody the other day, was all this information was out there in research bulk before
Mm-hmm.
Chat GPT ever existed, and we would be stupid to assume that these newspapers, publications, whatever, didn't know that this stuff existed out there
Right.
in bulk. So I think, like, yes, you have to find a framework of where it still like supports or directly monetizes the original source of that material, and at the same time allows others to be able to use it. in its
Hmm.
own research or academic or derivative way. Um, I mean, that's why things like archive of our own exists, is because people are like, hey, I love these stories, I want to turn them into fan fiction
Hmm.
and do something cool with it. On the other side, like, there was a company that I almost invested into earlier this year that what they did was they gave people a monthly subscription of a certain amount of credits to any newspaper that you wanted, whether it was a local newspaper, whether it was a national one like The Information or Forbes, but it still supported them directly. It supported those publications directly on the back end. So I look at stuff like that and I go, you can take both sides of the coin, and I think find a middle ground. Does AI need to be regulated? Yes. That way we don't have the Terminator franchise come to life.
Sure.
Because I think we would all
Elon will make
agree.
sure it does one way or another. Talk about a techno pessimist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like, I think, again, like, if there's a way to just regulate it where one side is happy, one side is, I guess if people can compromise,
Hmm.
then like, hey, cool. Um, I think people have a lot more in common than they realize when you strip away these arguments of like AI is a terrible thing, or like, oh my
Hmm.
god, I can't believe that you're doing this. Um, so that's how I see it.
Yeah. No, it's I always ask people about it because it is complex and unlike anything that
Yeah,
we've faced, except for those of us that remember Napster
yeah,
and what that did to the industry. Because a lot of the arguments are the same, right? It's like, well, this only existed in CD form; it was already out there, and
yeah,
I'm just putting it on a digital medium, and then I'm just sharing it with my friends. You can get it from the library for free anyways. So what am
yeah.
I?
I
Why is what
mean,
I'm doing is wrong? You know?
you can take a vinyl and rip it to CD. Am I gonna get
Yeah,
arrested because I did that? Like,
yeah. I was taping stuff off of the radio to make mixtapes when I was in elementary school. Like,
yeah,
is this? Am I doing? Is this that different? Right?
yeah. Now, one question that I do have for you though
Hmm.
is, we're in this period of time right now where entertainment is sort of on, I would say it's seven and a half life.
Yeah.
Do you think that the traditional format that was out there for like pop culture with television and streaming will start to make its way to YouTube and Instagram and TikTok? Because I've noticed that a lot of the like younger adult and Gen Z audience are not entirely like happy anymore with streaming,
Hmm.
and at the same time it feels like so much of those people's attention is on TikTok. So now you have this thing where there's no more like appointment viewing, or at least like even networks canceling shows to where, hey, there's nothing for me to watch anymore. Now I'm just going to go doom scroll on social media. Do you think it makes sense to probably try and do some of that same content that you would have seen on a place like Freeform or CW?
Maybe. I just feel like there's been so many plays in this space with YouTube Premium and with like YouTube used to have movie rentals on it, like, and even now with like Hulu TV and YouTube
Yeah,
TV, it's just like I think that the reason why those brands have not been perfect bedfellows in the past, they're just such different things, right? Like
yeah,
when I think of the brand of YouTube, YouTube is aspirational, it's free, it's a place where anybody can create, you can reach out to the creators, you can become a creator yourself if so inspired. Like, that's what makes YouTube special. The idea of like YouTube as a media company and is the number one home for premium stuff, I suppose that there's ways to do it. It just it feels like it's like putting a hat on a horse, right? It's like it's just not the right fit for what
yeah,
YouTube is best at, you know?
yeah. No, I mean YouTube did have some good originals that they did.
Yeah,
I think Cobra Kai started out as
Cobra Kai was. That was
yeah,
always my favorite. And I'm like, this should be on TV. But ultimately, Cobra Kai worked because it was a good traditional media thing, right? It was
and
like,
then
it should
eventually
have been
went
on
to
Netflix in the first place.
yeah,
Yeah,
and even then, I know Logan Paul had a series of films that were done.
yeah.
I'm blanking on the name of them. There was I swear on my life that there was a show with like Stana, and I'm blanking on it. That I thought was great,
Hmm.
but like yeah, it kind of stuck when YouTube originals went away because I
Yeah,
think also just though they went like, hey, let's try to create premium entertainment, but also not realize like we probably should like give some piece of this pie to homegrown talent from there. So, all right, so uh, as continued your journey in the entertainment space, you went to We Are Verified, became the COO for a few years. I feel like that's sort of a culmination point, or not really a culmination, but like a pulse moment where you've been in tech, you've been in the creator space, been in entertainment. Now it feels like you're able to do like everything all in one place.
yeah, I
So,
agree.
what was it like? Um, Again, being sort of in that environment where now you're back in the operating seat and second steering the ship, I guess.
Yeah, so the CEO of We Are Verified, Jordan Rorona, was I gave him his first job in digital at full screen. Then I brought him over to Studio 71. So we've been working together a very long time. And when I saw what he was doing in his company with especially creator services and his roster, he had a very, very impressive roster. It just seemed like a good fit, right? Because I could bring it all back together, right? All of my contacts and influencer marketing and everything, getting back to the front lines, getting my hands dirty. I think it also came from exhaustion from playing Silicon Valley a little bit too much and getting too far away from what I really love, kind of creators and content. And so being able to go in there and help build out the creator services side and scale the team and like it was pure joy. Like it was a really great couple of years.
Yeah. From there, you did Spree, which I think is fun, building media and health and wellness, which it
Hmm.
like it feels like the right fit for something, because
Yeah.
especially like interfusing health and wellness, shopping, and creators is just if and I guess maybe this is just my take, but it feels like a more like digitally first version of QVC.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it was an interim CEO position, which I love because I can kind of dip in, give all of my advice, help structure the company, and do all of that. So I was there for 6 months. Awesome. I learned a ton about health and wellness because I didn't know anything about that side of the business. But like shoppable video, I think is the natural evolution of influencer marketing. It just kind of cuts out a lot of the middleman, a lot of the hackiness of like go to my bio and link in bio and click on the thing. Like being able to just say like, look, this is a product, I'm using it right now, you can see it, this isn't special effects or fancy editing, you can buy it here. There's there, and I think that coming out of there, I was even more bullish on TikTok Shop and the future of I mean, Spree is still out there crushing it. So the future of
Yeah,
Spree, the future of TikTok Shop and whatnot, and all of those platforms.
I think TikTok is going to consume entire industries because just the reach that ByteDance has had with it is
Yeah,
so insane. Like you have TikTok Live, which sort of feels like a second coming of a lot of media and MCNs. You have the TikTok shop, you have Sound On, which is now just like them taking on the music industry.
right.
And I think it's just crazy. Even like I remember earlier this year when TikTok and Universal had their split, I remember telling this to somebody like that's not a like normal thing in business where a
Hmm.
platform says we don't need you.
Right.
Like it's
Totally.
normally the other way around where the media company is going, "Hey, we no longer value you, and it's just
Right.
crazy. Um,
Yeah.
from there, you went on to do some advisory stuff, but eventually went
Hmm.
to Nobody Studios. I remember when you guys had this big community round, and I thought it was even
Hmm.
crazier of like, hey, we want to create like 100 companies in 5 years.
Hmm.
Um, because one, that just feels like the ultimate startup challenge there of like, hey,
Right.
instead of going and building a company through like accelerators and VC, how about you just run this gauntlet and we're all like doing this together?
Right, totally. Yeah, no, and to be clear, I wasn't like an employee at Nobody. I was an investor, and I had their digital media advisory. But yeah, I mean, awesome. Like they're still out there crushing it and running and gunning, and they've got some really great product that they're
Yeah.
launching. So yeah, I'm bullish on them.
From there with Fixated, you guys are building next generation digital media. What's the future look like for you guys?
Yeah, the future is building infrastructure and content around creators. So the whole point of it has to be like, how do we make sure we're giving creators what they actually need? They need infrastructure, they need intelligence, they need help, they need to be able to make more content, do what they do very well, get in front of the camera, knock it out of the park, but then look at to be a little bit more of the business intelligence back end. And we do that both in a 360 management kind of way, but also as a pure per project, like operationalizing people's Snapchats or Microsoft Start programs or YouTube programs. So we think that the future is in almost being like a fractional COO to the creator economy, which is really exciting.
Absolutely. Well, Phil, I appreciate you taking time out of your day, extending a little bit, of time to chat with me. And again, I look forward to seeing everything that you guys are doing with Fixated. Uh, Definitely going to be eyeing what you guys do because I remember when Fixated started, I was like, there's something here that's special.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you.
Final question I have is for the people out there that are looking to get into the industry or at the same time, the 17, 18-year old Phil who's coming out of college with all the knowledge that you have now, what's the best advice that you can give to people?
Hit that post button. Start making content, start posting content, see how these platforms operate, really learn it, become a student of it. The best way to be in this industry is to actually use the product.
Absolutely. Well, Phil, again, thank you so much for the time. We'll make sure that links to Fixated are in the show notes. And, again, hopefully the holiday goes well for you.
Absolutely, you as well. Thank you so much for your time.